While some are clamoring for conference realignment, staying in the Big East is the right decision. You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. A little housekeeping on my end. YouTube support continues to be amazing and it grows every day. I'd love to have all those subscribers download the audio version wherever you get your podcasts. It's equally as important for helping my channel grow, but also the Locked On UConn audience grow so we can all interact together. So if you can do me two quick favors, first click that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. Then head over to Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Hit that follow button. This way you'll never miss a moment of Locked On UConn. I can't tell you how much that support means to me. It's everything. If you're tuning in from your car, once the show is finished, however you listen to the show, drop us a 5-star review. Good reviews trigger some referrals for people that are interested in UConn content and may not know exactly where to find it. You see, if you're watching this on YouTube, love the podcast, subscribe now. Make sure you go ahead and do that. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, I wanted to bring back this topic for no other reason other than there's no games to talk about, guys. You know, there's speculation whenever there's a big UConn open practice, whenever I hear storylines around Dan Hurley about maybe some potential. We're going to have some folks over the next couple of months talking about events that UConn Nation is doing, Husky Ticket Project, stuff like that. Happy to do stories like that. But I think what is so interesting about the idea of conference realignment in terms of UConn is really kind of going back and thinking about how unique UConn's relationship is in the Big East compared to other schools. I mean, over the past 2 seasons, Big East Commissioner Val Ackerman has celebrated UConn's success on the Final Four court, essentially watching Dan Hurley cut down nets. And the image is perfectly symbolizes the thriving partnership between UConn and the Big East. And we'll get into a reason of why that came back to fruition. This image is, UConn coming back to the Big East in 2020 has really rejuvenated the program. And I know that we are equally equally as big a part as one of the reasons why the Big East is thriving is UConn's success, but also the brand of just being back in the Big East, having that carrot at the end of the season to have that emotional drive. Like, I think back of Dan Hurley, like putting up those poster boards of the championships that we didn't win yet. Right. I think even, last year not having won the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden. Are you putting up the AAC trophy? Maybe you are, but it doesn't have the same impact. People aren't excited. Even like even if we're back in the Big 12 conversation of joining the Big 12, no one cares about the Big 12 championship trophy because you're playing in like Kansas City or St. Louis. And no disrespect to those really cool towns, as I've been to both. Great food there, great people, love the atmosphere, but nothing beats Madison Square Garden in the Big East tournament. And that emotional and visual impact of those celebrations cannot be overstated. They signify this triumphant return, but it also signifies that I don't think we're going anywhere anytime soon. And, we've talked about maybe splitting between the Big East and then potentially going to a football conference. We can get into all that, but it's the basketball-driven success that is so dynamic for UConn since it came back to the Big East. And the team's performance under Coach Hurley has nothing been short of spectacular, as we all know. So the decision to reunite with the Big East has paid off, and now we're starting to see the fruits of our labor, so to speak, with having this unique position within the Big East that has a predominantly basketball-focused conference, right? The landscape of college athletics is dominated by football, but not UConn. UConn's basketball success, both on the men's and women's, has been a perfect fit for this dynamic, and the synergy between the university's storied basketball programs and the conference's basketball-first approach has been very evident, right? This focus allows UConn to compete at the highest levels without really the overshadowing of a football-centric program. I mean, think about just even think about Kentucky, a huge basketball tradition and program. If their football program is in the SEC title game, they're going to get huge numbers, and that football program is going to do better than the basketball program. I think it's one of the reasons why John Calipari started to look elsewhere. Arkansas is probably not a great example for him, but you can't overstate how even when a program is as big as Kentucky, if their football program starts to make inroads in a large conference, it hurts the basketball dynamic. So it also has this unique feeling of a public university and having the football program versus, the private institutions that typically are in the Big East. And so, the Big East is known for the private institutions. UConn brings that broader public appeal and a commitment to maintaining a competitive football program. And this diversity strengthens the conference's overall profile. So the financial considerations of all of this and the future prospects are really important to bring up. Obviously, a media rights and financial media rights opportunity with a new deal with Fox Sports, NBC Sports, and TNT Sports has increased annual revenue by, some numbers are 40%, but it's pretty confirmed that 33%, 35%-ish is right in that area. So despite this, there's a financial disparity between us and the Power Fives. Still, UConn basketball's prowess has played a huge role in securing these deals, in highlighting the program's value and appeal. The revenue gap remains a challenge, but I really want the athletic department to start to think about emphasizing the strategic financial planning for the future, and really still keep this basketball-centric approach, not just because I love basketball more than football, but just because it kind of gets to the roots of the program. And you don't want to end up being like a Kentucky, like a Duke even, because even Duke's football program has been trash for years. And all of a sudden, they start winning a few games. They start potentially being in the top 25. You start getting away from that, what's the term in kind of scaling at a larger level? Operational control, right? And I think if we have a competitive football program, but we don't lose our roots, that is the biggest issue. So the primary focus should still remain on basketball, and the viability of the football program should continue to make it attractive for, future realignment with a Power 5 conference. If the Big East can't fulfill our needs, that's where I think we end up going. If the Big East continues to fulfill our needs, I say we stick our thumbs up at the Power 5 conferences and say, hey, have a wonderful time. We'll have our independent program and in terms of the football, and we'll continue to dominate in basketball. And I think that there's still a pathway for that, at least for the next 2 to 5 years, maybe longer, but I'm being conservative because things change at a level so fast in this world that, in 2 years, the Big 12, maybe the Big 10, or would it be crazy to see the UConn in the SEC with football? I mean, couldn't do any worse than Vanderbilt, right? So I just think you have to weigh the pros and cons. UConn can go into any basketball conference right now and be the best basketball program in the country, bar none, because they are. Would their football program compete? We'll see. And I'm also really excited to kind of see about that. If UConn's football program is on par with a Kansas, is on par with a Duke, is on par with a Kentucky going forward, there's no conference that wouldn't want UConn, because Dan Hurley's not going anywhere. Could you imagine the NIL implications if UConn was in, say, the Big 10 or the SEC or the Big 12? I mean, those numbers could go through the roof, and Dan Hurley could really put some great teams together, and our football program would be really fun to follow going forward. So we're going to continue down this Big East staying going path and why it makes sense to stay now. We talked about this a few months back, but we're going to pay a few bills here, and we'll be back after this. Hey, everyone. Summer is my favorite time to catch Major League Baseball games, and I'll never forget the time I was with a whole group of people. I don't know if you're from Connecticut, you probably took a bus down to Yankee Stadium or a bus up to Boston, and I witnessed a walk-off home run by Donnie Baseball and was introduced to the lovely beer shower at Yankee Stadium when I was 12 years old. I think that's when I probably fell in love with the game of baseball even more, because it was me and my cousin, and we were so excited about how silly everything was. And if you love creating those kinds of memories, good or bad or indifferent, you got to check out Gametime. Gametime is the authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, making it easier and faster to get your tickets with killer last-minute deals, all in pricing, views from your seat in your lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, and I recently browsed the Gametime app, and there's some amazing deals for upcoming Yankee games, down south Atlanta games. The app's feature is like a flash deal and zone deals. They're fantastic for snagging best seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, it's an easy-to-use interface, so if you're have a little technology anxiety, don't worry, it's easy to use. You can see panoramic views from your seat before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. You redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, you're back on Locked On UConn with your host, Mark Zanetto. So what are some challenges and opportunities ahead for UConn within the Big East in football's role and the financial investment that all this is predicated on? It's about money. Eventually, guys, we won't even be talking about this because there'll be so many games between the men and women, between the football programs. All we'll be talking about is the product on the field and enough speculation, right? So we're really kind of talking about, how much more continued investment can you put in the football program? Is this it? Is this the year? Is this the year that UConn football finally cashes in on the dreaded business term? What's the ROI, right? So they continue to pour resources into their football program despite its high cost. And if we're being generous, mixed results aren't going to cut it. High cost and no results is a recipe for disaster. The hope is to eventually align the program with the success of its basketball teams. Do I think we're going to compete for national championships? Absolutely not. And if I could use more colorful language, I would. But this is an ongoing investment. And like most investments, it takes time for you to get back your ROI. Nothing is a sweetheart deal. So I think the ongoing investment underscores the university's commitment to maintaining a balanced athletic department. However, the financial strain and need for improved performance are significant challenges. And that's where hopefully some of the improved recruiting, some of the improved NIL stuff, the facilities, I think the underappreciated, underestimated aspect of UConn football is the facilities. You're not, unless you're going to Georgia, Alabama, or, some of these SEC schools where they're basically $1 billion programs. If you're a 3-4 star, but maybe even the rare 5-star that UConn could get, you're not going to. If the program is for you, the facilities are fine, and they are not just fine. They're great. They look like any NFL facility that you can think of. So that to me is something that we compete with on a regular basis. Also, this goes without saying, Jim Mora Jr., he was an NFL coach. He was a college coach. The coaching that you're getting at UConn is second to none. Where are you getting better coaches to get you to that next level? That's something that we can compete on right from the jump. So if all things being equal and you have inexperienced coaches at mid-majors and potentially, lower power fives, but you want to come to an independent school where it's going to play a decently challenging schedule, then that's what UConn has. So I think from a financial perspective, the cost analysis of this, UConn's leadership must navigate these kind of competing demands to ensure sustaining growth and success across all sports. But what's important to the people is that their football and basketball programs are competitive. No disrespect. I played the non-revenue generating sports, right? I played tennis. Even if you go into baseball, is technically like a non-revenue generating sport, not on those levels. What do we got? Swimming, lacrosse, like all of these sports that are so vital to the community, but aren't necessarily going to make the team money. Having a viable football program and an elite basketball programs brings money to those sports as well. So I think the thing that isn't talked about enough is Gino Auriemma's influence on bringing the men's and women's programs back to the Big East, and basically just UConn in general, right? And renewing some of these rivalries. It's great to be playing Georgetown again, Providence, St. John's. Like it's insane. So, but the return to the Big East, it's revived those rivalries, and it's made it easier to travel. Like think about just this season from the UConn men's perspective on their run. They John Rothstein, who is a college insider, a little bit of a crazy person, but he had a great tweet later in the year that said, once they finished non-conference play and they were going into the postseason, UConn didn't have to get on a plane until they got to the Final Four. I mean, when you think about that, that's amazing. If they were still in the AAC, they're traveling all over the place. And so, playing Tulsa, playing Cincinnati before they went to the Big 12, Central Florida, same thing before they went to the Big 12. So it's some of the teams, and the ACC is going to get this too this year, at playing against SMU versus Clemson, Stanford versus North Carolina, like across the country. Like it's just as much as I know people are doing it to stay viable within the football world, it makes it incredibly difficult. And I sometimes scoff at some of these comments when broadcasters talk about, the travel that these kids put in. It's going to be a drain. If my old self right now took a plane to California, and you guys think I yawn a lot on this podcast, I would yawn 75,000 times from the time I had to jump off the plane to maybe do a show to then, do anything else. And then on top of that, these kids are juggling school. Maybe they have NIL agreements that they have to adhere to. Maybe they have to, do some kind of radio spot because that's how they get their NIL money, whatever the case is. These kids aren't just playing football and that's it. They're not professionals. They're still student athletes, one way or the other. So the idea of us getting back to more of a regional team, and I know that people will listen to this and say, well, they play against, Creighton and they play against Marquette. Sure, there is some travel, but it's relatively to the Northeast, right? And Gino Auriemma's influence on this, he played a significant role advocating for the move. He reflected a deep sentiment that this was, the Big East was UConn's identity. It was UConn's community, and his influence and legacy are second to none. It's instrumental in shaping UConn's identity within the conference, right? So Auriemma's continued success with the women outside of the Big East, but now that he wanted to go back, I think it really kind of made it almost a no-brainer. Right? And I think the UConn men were starting to come back from the doldrums of the Kevin Ollie situation, and then into the Dan Hurley era, and he had some moniker of success initially with UConn, but not to the success we see now. So I think that made a huge difference to have Gino on board. If it was just Dan at that time, I don't know if we're looking at the Big East. So kudos to Gino and his staff for making the push. Locked On thanks you for making Locked On UConn your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy Locked On College Football Podcast. That's with Spencer McLaughlin. He gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron, with a discussion on the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the transfer portal, NIL, new college football, expanded playoffs, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. When we return, we're going to go back again and talk. Listen, recruiting is hot and heavy right now. There were a couple guys we missed. We're talking about our recruiting updates yesterday, and we're also going to go back and talk about some of the guys we talked about in the last segment and kind of tell you when they're visiting, the likelihood of them going to UConn, and kind of what UConn's thoughts are about these players coming up after this. And you are back on Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto. Last segment of today's program. Where are we with recruiting? Well, we talked about some upcoming visits with Braylon Mullins. He visited the 6'5" athletic guard from Indiana. He visited Storrs late last week. Mullins is the number 23 overall prospect in the class of 22 and 25, and he is highly sought after. I would say he is more of a 5-star by the time all this is said and done. He's got the highest ceiling in terms of rising. He's definitely a fit for UConn, with players like Alex Karabin likely going pro after this season, and potentially Liam McNeely also maybe being an NBA lottery pick. So Mullins would be a perfect addition. We've talked about this kid now, I think his 4th or 5th time being mentioned on Locked On UConn. He had he just visited, saw some really cool pictures of him in his UConn attire around a ton of championships, six titles. He has visits with Michigan, North Carolina, Indiana, Tennessee, Kentucky. And he's expected to make his decision during the early signing period between November 13th to the 20th. So we still got a lot of time from Braylon to make his decision. We talk about Nico Bandalo. He's also a very intriguing prospect, 6'11", 220-pound power forward from Ohio. He visits UConn August 30th to September 1st. Bandalo is ranked right behind Mullins as the 24th overall prospect, so between 4 and 5 star. He's got also some visits that are set for Michigan State the following weekend and North Carolina in early October. He is also expected, from what I've heard, to be making a decision by the end of October, early November. Eric Ribey is the guy that most people have asked about because I've gotten more questions around, are they going to be, getting size, some physical guys, because I feel like some people feel like we lost a lot of beef with Donovan Clingan being gone. He's a 7-footer from Maryland, about 245 pounds. He'll be visiting UConn from September 6th through the 8th. Ribey is the number 4 center in the 45th overall prospect, so that puts him as a 4-star recruit according to 24/7 Sports, or as Dan Hurley likes to refer to them, outside entities. He has previous visits. He already recently visited Oregon. I know he's like a Midwest kid, obviously from Maryland, but Midwestern roots is from what I've heard from some of these scouting guys. So it wouldn't be shocking if Creighton, if Creighton got in the mix, if any Marquette in terms of finding a guy who can shoot it, because Eric is not your traditional 7-footer. He can step out from the 5 spot and rip the 3 as a lefty. Pretty sweet looking stroke. So number 4 on this list is Tande Yosefu and Darius Adams, 4 and 5. Tande is a 6'5" power forward from California. He's ranked 26 by 24/7. Again, another 4-star, 5-ish. Will be visiting UConn from September 20th to the 22nd. Darius Adams, the 19th prospect in the class of 25. Adams will visit UConn from the October 4th to the 6th. He made an unofficial visit to UConn a little over a month ago. Some people have said that Darius is kind of cooled on UConn, but the fact that they're bringing him for an official visit in the first weekend of October makes me think that some of that stuff is BS. And I think Darius would be an amazing fit, and I think they're high on him at 6'5". Needs to put on some weight, but what freshman doesn't? Malik Thomas update. We're still waiting on him. He is still planning on visiting Arkansas, expected to make his final decision in October. Dan Hurley and his staff are monitoring him closely, and I'm sure they're in contact with him. I think they have what he needs, and they know that he's a fit. What was Dan Hurley's advice talking to him, saying that you're a badass out there, but I'm a badass too. And so Malik knows that Dan wants him. And so unless a program comes and, does something crazy with NIL or, promises him the moon and stars, I think he will be a Husky. And looking ahead to 2026, yes, they are looking at 2026, you may say. They have some new offers out. UConn is starting to extend offers to the class of 2026, including offers from Quaden Samuels. He's a 6'5" shooting guard from Maryland, and the younger brother of UConn women's basketball guard Quaden Samuels. Top prospects, UConn has also offered Jordan Smith. He's a 5-star recruit from Virginia's St. Paul IV, and Brandon McCoy, a California point guard who is a top recruit in the 2026 class. And local kid Abdu Torre, the Huskies like him. They've seen him play several times. I've actually don't know this directly, but I know that Kamani does a lot of this recruiting, especially locally from here to Philly. So I'm sure that he's in touch with Notre Dame West Haven's coach, Jason Shea. I'm surprised they haven't offered him yet, but they haven't. So the only other programs that are interested right now are Kansas and Arkansas for Abdu. I do say that, even though I've mentioned this a million times, that the strategy is to cast a wide net. UConn tends to be much more frugal, if you will, with their offers than some of the other schools. They like to make sure, as we've talked about and chronicled a million times, that Dan Hurley likes to recruit the parents as much as the players. So, but there's still time for that. So I think they also cast a wide net, but they don't. Let's say if a team, to give you an example, like we did this a couple of shows ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago. I think 2 years ago they offered 21 kids. It was down to 17 last year, and it's 13 this year. Don't have the official numbers for 2026 on how many they've offered so far. But the whole point around that is what I'm saying is that if UConn's offering 20, a rival may offer 40 kids, and then they kind of disperse from there, right? The widest net possible from there. So UConn tends to be in the mix with guys who they feel like are going to be game changers for them, culture changers, not culture ruiners and program ruiners, as Dan Hurley likes to talk about them. So stay tuned. We'll continue to follow everything that goes on, and UConn's recruiting efforts are in full swing. And I think the next few months will be crucial in shaping the future of the Huskies program. So today was kind of an interesting show as we talked a lot about the Big East and staying with it. And I still strongly believe that the Big East is the place for us. No matter how many times the Big 12 flirts with us, or honestly, the only program, the only conference, and this would only be predicated if the football program was to somehow take off and be at a higher level, that I would entertain as the SEC, because then you have the best of both worlds. You can compete for national championships in both. Do I think UConn football can get to that level? Maybe. Do they have the resources? Likely. It's just about the right mix, right? I don't know if Jim Mora Jr. is the right guy for that. We'll find out. I think there were some questions about Dan Hurley 4 years ago, and those questions have been answered pretty emphatically. So anything is possible. I don't think anybody, when I was a kid in 1988, thought that the UConn Huskies men's program was going to win 6 championships in the next, how many years is that? 40, 35, 36 years since 1988, 89, 90, when I was really kind of in on the UConn men. And I doubt when the UConn women started to take off under Gino in the early 90s, I don't think anyone thought they'd have 11. So could we get to that point where the football program is competing for a national championship? I think we can. So thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen of today. Now go check on Locked On College Football podcast, from NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment. Rumors, Spencer McLaughlin get you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to do any searching. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And don't forget, 2 weeks from Friday, or 1 week from Friday, we will have our first UConn Football Friday show with my co-host from the TNT podcast. We will get you guys ready to go. We will likely be giving away UConn football tickets to the opening game. So we're trying to figure that out now and how we're going to go about it. And just stay tuned. And this has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked in, stay connected. Make sure your toughness meter is always rising. And as always, go Huskies.